Well, I am Jean Zegger, and I have lived here for over 50 years. Before that time, and until I married a man whose job was here in Schenectady, I lived in New York City. When we arrived in 1958, the neighborhood had actually moved from a period of decline, and it was becoming recognized as a place of importance for its history and for its architecture. The year before we came, the Stockade Association was founded, and until that time it was called Village. That didn't seem like a distinctive enough name, so the stockade was settled on, since that fence was surrounding the area when it was the early settlement. So the purpose was asked of one of the founders, and the answer was, in case there are difficulties. And so, well, the actual stated mission is preservation, protection, and improvement. The neighborhood has always been primarily residential, so what we have to offer is a quality of life here that will attract homeowners who will care for these buildings, historic buildings that need a lot of attention through the years. The buildings, the natural setting, the park, Riverside, is so special. It's here we are, close to a city with all that a city has to offer, and yet we have places here that are quiet and natural. A comment was made years ago in the 60s by the editor of a recognized magazine called the Architectural Forum. The editor said that the romantic lawn along the Mohawk that has been created out of the Stockade Park Strip is probably the finest thing of its kind in America. He said that because so often a river has a railroad running across the banks. And here you have perfect access from the neighborhood right to the riverfront and all the waterfowl and wonderful things that we enjoy year-round at the river. My children grew up here. They went to the local school, walked to school, came back for lunch. There was so much enhancing their lives that today they think this place, despite their wide travels, as unique. And they just love coming back here. Really, the place is endlessly interesting. There was one morning when I looked out my kitchen window and saw the neck and head of a camel slowly walking down to the riverfront. Well, I learned that there was a party for a woman who had turned 100 years, and when she had been in the Middle East, she never had a chance to ride a camel. So to celebrate, they had quite an event with bagpipes pipes and the rest, and she indeed mounted the camel. And I thought, well, I don't know of any place where I would look out my kitchen window and see such things. It's really been a wonderful place to live. I'm happy that this is where I have called my home for the greater part of my life. Well, I was almost thinking of saying, you know, coming from New York, well, I'm off the record now, but coming from New York City, the transition to upstate New York was made so easy by living initially in this neighborhood because of all that it had to offer.
It was a much different place, though, Schenectady in the late 50s, right?
One important way that it was different was that there were children living here because of the grade school. Mm-hmm. Riverside School was grade school until 6th grade. And so people bonded as families, and the children at that time had the freedom to be out all day with their friends. We didn't like learning of things later on, like going down to the river or ice skating there or whatever they did, but they had the freedom that children don't have today. They could go down to State Street and buy presents for each other for birthdays and the like. Later, go down to the library, which is so accessible. There were theaters that they could go to. They actually had the experience of city living, even though they had essentially a residential neighborhood to live in.
And when people have talked about the park having an out pool in the park and programs there for kids.
Yeah, that was a little earlier than the time that I was here. Yeah, and there are events that are not taking place now, like the Memorial Day picnic and the like. Those were activities that were fun for children. Bake sales and games in the park. But without the children, it's a little bit different. We do have some children, but nowhere near the numbers that we had when the school was in the neighborhood. Now, of course, it's the condominiums.
And you were involved, and your husband was also very involved in the association.
Yes.
Right away in the beginning when you moved here, or?
My husband was a president of the association. He was on the board. I was on the board. What we found was that people who lived here had a goal, a kind of commitment to be sure that this very special place would be on sound footing and not, decline as it once did.
Was there a lot of resistance to starting an historic? I mean, I'm always interested in that because historic neighborhoods, preservation was not always a popular theme. I mean, it conflicted with commercial interests and people to tear things down and build new. And some older residents probably were not as enthusiastic about making.
Most of the residents really, truly, there were just a few places that did not want to be part of the historic district, and that was 108 Union Street, the building that was the Board of Education.
Was
with
the
the
association
pillars.
Started before? When did it become a?
The association was started in 1957.
And it became a historic district.
And it became a historic district in 1961. Okay, I don't want that on the record because I have to be very careful about dates. And then in 1973, it became on the National Register of Historic Places. Well, you know that Warner and Jim, they talked about this, how they decided that we had to have an organization, okay? And that's what happened in 1957. They made sure that we were the first historic district in the state of New York because they knew of an enabling act, state enabling act that said communities could have historic districts under some, with adequate reason. And they applied and were the first. And here's Brooklyn Heights coming in second. These things just added up to the recognition of the importance of this place. You know this. I don't know how you want to include.
Oh, this, you talked about writing this that project.
Yes.
You talked about the project of getting that gateway.
Right. Do you have anything else about the gateway? Did Vernon and Jim?
Nobody said anything about that project.
That was a wonderful collaboration between private and city to improve that entrance, which we call the gateway entrance to the stockade. It was a wonderful, wonderful project. So many people of diverse backgrounds were on it. I mean, we had architects and we had, the housekeeper was really a woman who chaired the meeting, and she was so wonderful. She brought all these disparate people who were maybe dominating a little bit, but it was one of the great things that was done with the Stockade Association, but also with Heritage and the city, and the fundraising. We know we collected funds for.
How did you do fundraise?
There is a Schenectady Foundation that contributed. Stockade Association contributed, Heritage Foundation, and then there were other private donors.
So when it finally all came together, you were actually asked to write the inscription, right?
Yes. Okay. I made a suggestion, and Jim Schmidt said, well, why don't you write? And that was another very time-consuming thing, because there, and this is an aside, there was a retired professor of political science from Vassar who was writing it with someone at the Historical Society, and he said he wouldn't do it because it was so political. But the way he was doing it, he was mentioning names, houses that were of particular interest. You know, it would have been very political. So I tried very hard just to state facts in ways that no one would find offensive. For instance, I did not say that the English came in with their warships and, it came under British rule. You know, we don't say how, right? And we don't say the French and Indian War. No, we don't want to offend the French, so we call it the first of the colonial wars or something like that. And it just worked out very nicely because they had designed it with 4 panels. And I was able to have the same number of sentences in each one so that visually it would look good.
Are there other big projects like that over the years?
As far as infrastructure goes?
Or anything really that
Yeah.
the association did, or...
Oh yes, it fought a medical waste incinerator. It did not approve or I say opposed again, a Taco Bell's Hot and Now on the corner of State and Union, where the parking lot is for the Van Dyke. So there would be no Van Dyke restaurant because there would be no parking. Those were 2 things which people in the people on the city council thought would be good. The medical waste incinerator was a business. Well, there'd be no Mohawk Marina if there was a medical waste incinerator at the end of Front Street, and there'd be no restaurant, the Van Dyke, if they didn't have parking. There would be other things. Motel on Washington Avenue, 50 Washington Avenue. Motel, yeah. So I have a list, if you're really interested, of things we supported and things we rejected. Those things would have happened without an association, yeah.
Back in the 50s, when you first moved here, there were more businesses and things in the Stockade. What was that?
Well, what would be an example of that? I mean, Arthur's Market existed.
I wasn't there.
Yeah.
A lot of people talk about some of the little smaller shops and things that were in the neighborhood.
I wonder what they're talking about.
Maybe it was before.
I don't think so. I doubt that.
I mean, there was a butcher shop on North Street, and where the Moon and River is, there was some.
Oh, on the there was a newsstand. Yeah, there was that was sort of very. There was a place where you could go. Kids would get candy, and they could get newspapers, and yeah. But in the heart of the Stockade, I think of Arthur's Market. At one time, there was a shoe repair shop or something around where the Indian is now. That predated my, yeah.
Well, what about some of the neighborhoods? The association, aside from preservation and stuff, there was also the social aspect of it.
Yes.
Talked about the Memorial Day picnic and things.
Right. Well, the tree lighting actually started before the association was formed. And the art show was formed before the association. It's called the Villages Outdoor Art Show, and that's where the term villages come from, because it was called the Village. Yeah, so certain things like that, those two things stand out as existing before, but not very much before the association. The people who were founders, there were 2 architects, a doctor, a lawyer. So these were pretty much professional people who felt the need to assure that Werner once called it a fragile place. It could be if we did not have our voices heard. Yes. Is there anything here that you think, like, anything significant, like saying what, you know, I suppose you know how the Stockade became the first historic district. Surely Vern and Jim covered that.
They did talk about that, but I wonder if it wouldn't, I mean, we could even in the beginning of the video, there's just this short history.
I mean, we're one of the oldest cities in America.
You want to maybe read that history?
I could read it if it would be fast enough.
I mean, we need everything. And
Okay.
I mean, I'm an everything kind of guy, and even if someone else said something, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't say it differently.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it gives us a choice of who
Yeah, I mean,
says
this is important. Architectural historian, I mean, don't take this now. Architectural historians say that the several hundred buildings in the historic Stockade District represent a unique collection of early and intermediate styles. Many historic buildings, many historic areas are of a single architectural period, and that's significant. That's what, you know, you go down to Georgetown, you've got pretty much the same kind of architecture. But houses here span 3 centuries, providing a total history of domestic architecture in America. The Stockade has been called a, quote, a living museum, quote, for unlike other historic sites, houses continue to be lived in. I mean, if you're looking for you know, and this is still true, that part is still true. I wrote this first in 1996 when we had a problem here. Actually, we wanted Riverside School to become Brown School.
You talked about that in the last
I did?
Yes, yeah.
Because we thought that it would be more of a neighborhood to have children, or families come here with children. Blake Realty managed to buy it because they had the larger bid. And so we didn't win that one. But we had a lawyer who said, look, I'm representing you before the Commissioner of Education. What's so special about your neighborhood? So I said, well, we think it's unique. Let me write up what I think could support that. So it was done in '96, but then I redid it this year so that I could use it against the motel in trying to establish that we're a special place. Schenectady's historic Stockade District, a unique place in America. The history was founded in 1661. As such, Schenectady is one of the oldest cities in America. To protect the new settlement, a timber stockade wall was built in 1664. It embraced 4 blocks of the current boundaries of what is now called the Stockade neighborhood. The stockade played a significant part in the 4 wars of the colonial period and in the Revolutionary War. George Washington visited a house here. In 1795, Union College became the first college chartered in upstate New York and was first located in the Stockade. Schenectady was incorporated as a city in 1798, and the first mayor was Joseph Yates, who in 1823 became a governor of New York State. In 1823, the Marquis de Lafayette was a guest at his Stockade house, which is still a residence. Wharves, warehouses, and boat building shops serviced traffic along the Mohawk River during 3 wars, but they were destroyed by a disastrous fire in 1819. When businesses relocated closer to the Erie Canal, the stockade became mainly residential. After a period of decline in the early 20th century, a group of homeowners began a process of restoration without government or outside help. Residents organized the Stockade Association in 1957 to help preserve the neighborhood, and 4 years later started to publish the newsletter, The Stockade Spy. Both the association and the publication continue to this day. In 1962, the Schenectady Stockade became the first district in the historic district in the state of New York. The city established it as a legally protected historic zone under a state enabling act. The state Supreme Court approved a certificate of incorporation for the Stockade Association in 1973, empowering it to, quote, encourage a concern for the stockade area, end quote. The Stockade Historic District was declared a landmark in 1973 when it was entered into the National Register of Historic Places maintained by the U.S. Department of the Interior. About architecture, a residential community for over 300 years, a portion of a stockade house is believed to date before the massacre of 1690. A residence built in the early 1700s is the only Dutch urban-style house in the country that still has the original brick facade largely intact. There are more than 80 historic buildings in the stockade, of which about 24 predate the Revolutionary War. There are several landmark churches, one designed by the, quote, master builder, end quote, Samuel Fuller, who left his mark on early American architecture. Architectural historians say that the several hundred buildings in the historic Stockade District represent a unique collection of early and intermediate styles. Many historic areas are of a single architectural period, but houses here span 3 centuries, providing a total history of domestic architecture in America. The stockade has been called, quote, a living museum, end quote, for unlike other historic sites, houses continue to be lived in.
That's really good.
Yeah.
You're a great reader.
Yeah.
No, I think that sort of sums
It
up.
does, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that we really have had any, something so succinctly describing
Yeah.
the neighborhood
Yeah.
really yet in the interview. So
Yeah,
that
that's
actually is really
great.
good.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that I'm glad
Yeah.
is established because,
Yeah.
so what's so special? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. I mean, that's, though we're making a documentary about that.
yeah,
So
right.
there's a reason.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, that we have a pool and that the kids love. I mean, really, my children have, I mean, especially my daughter, she has traveled, so I know of no one who has traveled the world as she has. She comes here and it's so special, and it's not just because she was born in this house and grew up in this neighborhood. She feels that something is very distinctively different. Neighbors care about each other. We seem bonded by this desire to see that this special place is on sound ground. It's unique. You think so too?